There's this actress.
I've got this feeling that's Nina, my sister.
Oh, Max Weinstein with Dread Central. Hi, Prano. Thanks for so much for speaking with us. And you've made a terrific first film, so we have a lot to dig into.
Well, thank you.
So Censor is your first feature. And of course, making your first comes with a massive set of trials and tribulations. What were some of the biggest challenges you faced on the set as you made the film, and how did you navigate them?
I mean, there's like the creative challenges and then there's the practical challenges. I mean, I think on the creative side, I always knew going into the film that one of the big challenges that I could see when I was writing the film is you're telling a story about a character who doesn't talk openly about what they think or feel because she's very censored, and yet you need the audience to be in her head throughout the film. So it felt like that was something I knew going in. I needed to find an actress who was going to let the audience into that character, but also then work with my heads of department, my cinematographer and my editor, for example, and then my sound team to use every element of the kind of filmmaking techniques that we had available to us to keep us inside Enid's head. So that was definitely a kind of the creative challenge, which was really fun to approach. But then I guess on the practical logistic on the ground challenge side, definitely shooting in forests in the winter in the north of the UK, north of England, was a challenge because it was freezing and muddy and it rained, and you think of like lighting a forest. I mean, it's funny because Texas Chainsaw Massacre, me and my DOP found out that all the running in the woods shots in Texas Chainsaw Massacre were done within the same few meters. They just set up one track, lit it, and ran backwards and forwards. And we were like, that's a good idea, but we didn't end up doing that. We had to like light every different area of the forest. So you can imagine like powering those lights and them getting those lights through the mud and everything day after day in the woods. So that was definitely, I think, the most challenging part of the shoot. And also it's towards the end of the shoot as well, so you're all really tired doing night shoots, but it was great and we kept our spirits up.
You'd be surprised what the human brain can edit out when it can't handle the truth.
I mean, did you have any equipment breaking down from the cold or anything like that? Or was it more just the management of personalities and the management of sort of shot setups and stuff toward the end of the shoot?
It was more the management of mud, to be honest. Like, it was so muddy in that forest. The mud that you see Neve and Sophia, or Enid and Alex Lee in the end, was real horrible mud that we were wading through with the equipment. So it was more the kind of elements of nature. The rain, there was like torrential rain on one day when we were shooting, and that's just really hard to operate in. But in terms of like the crew and my heads of department, my DP, my costume designer, my makeup artist and production designer, I'd worked with all of them before apart from my production designer. That was incredibly harmonious. Amazing, just such hardworking people that want to go that extra mile. So everybody just got stuck in, and we ended up wrapping Neve and Sophia in cling film under their costumes to keep them warm, because nighties are very cold in that kind of weather.
Someone's losing the plot.
To speak to what you were saying about capturing your main character's interior state, one way to look at Censor is that it is a story of one person's deteriorating mental state, and depicting mental health or mental illness in horror can be a very tricky thing. So what were your do's and don'ts when approaching that aspect of the story, both as a screenwriter and as a director?
I didn't really have don'ts necessarily. At least I can't think of don'ts. I was really always about understanding the character and understanding where she's come from and why she's doing the things that she's doing. So you're getting into the head of the character when you're writing it and making sure that everything feels authentic and truthful to her experience. And that has to be based on her backstory and where she's come from. So we thought a lot about why she'd become a censor, what it was that had driven her to this, which was need to protect people because she's trying to make up for something she thinks she's done wrong in her past. and the responsibility that she puts on her shoulders because of that is huge. And that's the thing that's weighing her down. That's the thing that's kind of eating away at her. And so then you're trying to find little ways to show that. So it's small details like how much she beats herself up when she makes a tiny mistake, like a spelling error on the typewriter, and the fact that she's taking everything on. We also were looking at what are her kind of lifelines in the film. She doesn't really have any lifelines. There's only one point where someone reaches out to her to see if she's okay. And that is when Perkins asked her if she wants to go for a drink. But she's so closed, you know, as a person, she doesn't want to let anybody in. So she can't even allow that person to come in because the people that she has been close to, she's hurt. It was always basing it in the truth of the character and trying to go back and research the experiences of people who have suffered from ambiguous loss. But it's more than ambiguous loss in Enid's case, because she feels that it's her fault. It's taking those two things and I guess really empathizing with that character when you're writing them and trying to just put yourself in their shoes and try to understand them from the inside out. And I hope that means that you're depicting, I guess, mental health issues, her depression and loneliness in a way that feels just for the sake of it.
And, you know, you've said that you believe horror is both healing and cathartic. There's some irony in that Censor is a story about a person who's kind of obsessed with healing society in her own way by censoring, or in some cases banning, certain strains of horror film. And, you know, in terms of the struggles that you're describing and how you attempted to capture those, I'm wondering if you could kind of talk about how healing and catharsis are at play in this film in terms of the character revelations and development.
Enid does believe that she's protecting society by them not being able to see these films, but I think that all comes back to her fatal flaw, really, is that she's not dealing with anything. You know, she's not able to kind of actually look at and deal with her issues. That kind of links into the idea of censorship in horror and this idea of like, we must hide it all away, repress it, you know, don't look at it, and how you can do that to yourself sometimes as well and think, well, I don't want to deal with that problem, or I don't want to deal with this aspect of myself, so I'm going to shut it away. And I guess I think of, you know, that repression as being incredibly unhealthy, and the idea of this being about the return of the repressed, and the idea that the more we push things down, the more we try not to look at them, eventually those things are going to seep out in a more twisted and poisonous way. You know, they'll come out in the end, but we won't be in control of them because we haven't learned to tame that side of ourselves, like our shadow self. And I was thinking a lot about horror, and I think about horror in that sense, that it is the return of the repressed. But also I was thinking, well, what is horror for me, you know, when I was making this film? And I think it is cathartic. Storytelling is cathartic, both in terms of being a storyteller and being an audience. Either you're experiencing a story and you're experiencing emotions that sometimes, you know, in real life, you don't want to sit and kind of weep about that thing, but you can go and watch a film and it makes you weep, or you watch something like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and it's just like this pure terror experience, and there's something really cathartic about that experience. And I think that that's something that's quite healthy about storytelling, because it's a fictional space for us to be having those experiences, to be afraid, to be sad, to laugh. It's not a real space, you know, we can do all those things there. It's a safe space to be scared. And I think there's something that you can kind of process in that space internally. And also as a storyteller, I think sometimes you can work through your own thoughts and feelings on life and the world through the stories that you tell. So I guess those are the things that kind of brought me to that, you know, cathartic element.
Absolutely. And when you talk about the return of the repressed, and repression as sort of an urge for in its character, and for the censor's job in general, there's one scene in which she is asked to tap into her darkest impulses, and she responds by saying she doesn't have any. And it seems like that moment is really kind of at the heart of the film. that a person whose job it is to censor video nasty films would be in deep denial about the darker side of human nature even existing. And I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about, it sounds like you did sort of touch on that a bit, but if you could just elaborate a little bit more just about that scene and that exchange and how it serves the story you're telling.
Great. I love the way you described that, because I also think of it as being like, I remember David Lynch describing that there's like an eye of the duck scene in every film. And it's like when you're drawing a duck, it needs to have an eye, otherwise it's abstract and it's not a duck. And that's the scene that kind of pulls everything else together. I sort of think that scene is the eye of the duck scene in Censor, because it has a lot of my thoughts in it as well, in terms of some of the things that Frederick North is saying about horror existing in the world, and the art is a reflection of that rather than something that is pummeling darkness into the world. You know, it's not like humans were these angelic creatures before horror films existed. Like, we've been a violent species prior to film. Enid's reaction in that moment that you've described is really important, because this is about somebody who is so ashamed of their shadow self, of the bad parts of themselves, that they're not even going to acknowledge that they exist. And that's what I mean about, you know, somebody not accepting that. So it's going to brew up and come out in a wild, untamed way. Whereas I think it's really healthy to be aware of ourselves and understand that nobody's perfect, and we've all got bits of ourselves that we maybe like a bit less than others, parts of ourselves, and you know that we've all got that, haven't we? Like, I don't know, it's what makes people interesting and balanced and human, that we can be both the light and the dark. Enid can't face that, and that's a big part of her flaw, you know, is that she has not tended to the dark parts of herself, perhaps, and she's let them get more and more twisted, and they're going to come out and get her.
Horror is already out there in all of us.
And you know, when we get to that section of the film, the visuals become increasingly engrossing and kind of phantasmagoric. And in creating the look of Censor, I understand that Lucio Fulci's films were an important frame of reference for your cinematographer, Anika Summerson. Can you tell me about the elements of style in Fulci's work that were especially influential in this film?
I watched The House by the Cemetery and The Beyond quite a bit, and Zombie, and listened to a lot of the soundtracks, obviously, as well. The lighting and the colors were really influential, and we talked a lot about the color journey in the film and how, I guess, the film kind of becomes more saturated as it goes on, but that was kind of woven through the film gradually. So you start with something more bleak and oppressive and Thatcher's Brittany, and then you sort of weave in these slightly more lurid, vibrant colors. And a lot of the colors that we were, you know, using were inspired by The Beyond in particular, and also a little bit of Suspiria. So I was showing those films to my DOP, Anika Summerson, to really be inspired by the like aesthetic and the lighting and the colors. But then also, maybe not Fulci's work, but I tended to watch them a lot for the camera would move with the actors, and how you could, you know, how you could make something feel of that era by the way it's shot, the way that maybe in the more shonky video nasties, for example, the camera would lead the actor. So you'd have a scene where you could sort of feel the actor waiting for a beat because they know they're meant to move after that line, and you know, and you can sort of feel that like restriction for the actor. And so that was quite fun to analyze and break down and try to infuse in different moments. So for example, in Asunder, when she watches that, I was telling the guy who played Tom, you know, when he says wait, let me see, that he doesn't walk on that, you know, the instinct is to go, wait, let me see, and go. I was like, no, you deliver the line, wait a beat, and then go, because we're timing it with the camera move. And, you know, that sort of thing was really quite fun. But also, I think, I mean, in the score, we leaned into like Goblin and Carpenter, but I was also like getting Emily Levianese-Farouche, our composer, to listen to some of those scores for Lucio Fulci's films, because I mean, they're amazing. The Italian composers of that era just knew how to do it, didn't they?
Fabio Frizzi.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible stuff. And it what you're saying about leading the camera or leading the actors with your camera and allowing some of those techniques to dictate camera movement definitely plays into the alignment that we get with the character's perspective as well. So
yeah.
On a purely primal level, what fears would you say this film taps into and explores the most, thematically, narratively, visually, sonically?
That's an interesting question to break it down. I mean, ultimately, I think ambiguous loss is the heart of the horror in this film. It's not knowing. And for Enid, that is what's propelled her, is not knowing. The terror of not knowing leading her to imagine all the worst things in her head that could have happened, and to live in a nightmare where she's constantly imagining that her little sister could have been killed, and then feeling guilty that she has imagined that she's dead because she might not be dead. She could have been kidnapped. And she, so then going to the fear of, well, what if I did something, to her? What, that guilt leading you to thinking, well, what if I feel guilty because I'm responsible physically for what happened? So I think at the heart of it, it's ambiguous loss. I guess that's kind of where we all were working from, and certainly where I was working from in the script and with Neve. Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer the other aspects off the top of my head.
That's okay. I think it addresses it, very, very sufficiently. It doesn't need to be every aspect of the film language, but there's a lot going on in the sort of design and construction of the film. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about it. My last thing is, so what are some of your favorite video nasties, and what drew you to them?
I mean, I've got so many favorites. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is definitely a favorite. When I was a teenager, The Evil Dead I was literally obsessed with that film. Based a play when I was about 17, I based a play off The Evil Dead, which was a terrible play, called Kill Her If You Can, Loverboy, which is a line from The Evil Dead. Then I would say Basket Case. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is what you want to watch when you want to be like pure terror, ultimate dread, like, the feeling in your bones of like them vibrating because they're scratching down like a blackboard. Whereas I think Basket Case is more like midnight movie, a few beers in a cinema with your friends, kind of laughing at the bonkersness of that movie. But then I would say The Witch Who Came from the Sea for something that's kind of more woozy and nightmarish, and perhaps a bit more serious than the other ones. I think it's kind of a mini masterpiece that is has really been overlooked. It got tangled up on this list, and in some ways maybe that's why this list is a gift, because it might have been forgotten about entirely if it hadn't have been such a problem at the time. But I think that's an incredible film that I hope more people go and watch, because it's very special.
It is a special film to discover, and that's like a very well-rounded trifecta. Were there anything in your research, anything that you discovered about those films that you weren't previously aware of as you were kind of digging through video nasty history?
I mean, there's so much that I discovered. Like, I guess one of the things, I don't know, some people know this already, but one of the things I kept going back to about Cannibal Holocaust, because obviously Cannibal Holocaust was a problematic title because of the animal cruelty, or not even, it's animal murder. And he was prosecuted for that. But he was also basically accused of making a snuff film, but he set out to make a snuff film, or to make it look like a snuff film. It's a found footage film. He hired actors that weren't very well known, cast them in this movie, and made them sign contracts to say they wouldn't work again for X amount of years after the film came out, or X amount of months, so that it seemed like they'd actually died on the shoot or in this footage. So when he was taken to court for murder and animal cruelty, he had to get the actors to come forward and say, we're still alive.
Right.
We didn't die. And so he was obviously let off the hook for the murder aspect, the snuff film aspect, but was prosecuted for the animal murder. So I guess that's the first thing that pops to mind. But I've got like so much research, like, I sometimes pop back into my research folder and I'll remember something that I read in a file at the BBFC or something like that. And yeah, it's a lot to kind of hold in your head all at once.
Yeah, it's easy to get bogged down in the details, right? And I think that's one of the many great reasons why you're justified in incorporating fictional video nasties into the narrative, so that it's not so bogged down by all of those details, and it just serves the story, which is lean and mean and incredibly impressive. So so thanks so much. I greatly appreciate your time, and congratulations on the film and its continued journey and afterlife beyond the circuit, and into release and going forward. I think people will be talking about it for a long time.
Oh, I hope so. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.